The mornings used to feel like a promise. Light slid through the thin gap in the curtains, soft and pale, landing on the edge of the table where my coffee waited, untouched. I liked to pretend the day always began this way, quiet, balanced, steady. Like nothing could tip it over that I told myself I had everything figured out. A partner who knew the way I took my tea, who remembered my deadlines, who held my hand in crowded places like it was a reflex instead of a choice. We were predictable in the best way. Safe. The kind of safe you build over time, brick by brick, without realizing how heavy it becomes to carry. And then there was him, that he had always been there, in the background of my life, like a familiar shadow that never felt threatening. We grew up side by side, learned each other's moods, shared secrets the way people do when they think nothing will ever change. He wasn't part of my romantic world. He existed outside of it, in a space I labeled as untouchable, unquestionable, permanent. That's what made it easy. Late nights turned into our thing. The house quiet, everyone else asleep, the world reduced to the hum of the fridge and the glow of a screen. We talked about everything that didn't fit neatly into my relationship. The fears I didn't want to admit out loud. The doubts I didn't want to burden my partner with. The versions of myself I didn't know how to become. That he listened in a way that felt like being seen instead of being solved. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing a little too softly, like I didn't want anyone else to hear. Sometimes I'd look at my phone and realize I'd ignored a message from the person I loved just to finish a conversation with him. I always had a reason ready. I was tired. I was busy. I'd reply later. Later became a habit that I didn't think of it as choosing. I thought of it as convenience. Comfort. Familiarity. He knew my stories already. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to be careful with my words. I could just be. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dark except for the small circle of light from my phone. My partner was asleep beside me, breathing slow and even, their back turned, lost in a world I wasn't part of at that moment. My screen lit up with his name. That I hesitated. That it was a small thing, that pause. Barely a second. But in that second, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet awareness I pushed away as quickly as it came. That I answered. That we talked about nothing important. A memory from years ago. A joke that didn't really land. A story about someone we both knew. But beneath it, there was a feeling I couldn't name. Like standing too close to the edge of something deep and pretending you didn't notice how far down it went. When I finally put the phone down, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, my partner still asleep. I felt full and empty at the same time. Connected and alone in the same breath. The next morning, over breakfast, my partner asked me what I'd been smiling about in my sleep. I shrugged. Said I couldn't remember my dreams. It wasn't a lie. Not really. I just didn't tell them what had kept me awake. Days passed like that. Normal on the outside. Quietly complicated on the inside. That I started measuring my moments. What I could share with him. What I should save for my partner. What felt safer to keep to myself. I told myself it was healthy to have different people for different parts of my life. I told myself everyone did, but sometimes, in the middle of a conversation with my partner, I'd think, I can't wait to tell him about this later. That thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. One afternoon, we stood in the kitchen, sunlight cutting across the floor in sharp lines. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like he always had, like he knew the rhythm of my movements better than I did. I felt it then, a strange awareness of the space between us. Not big. Not small. Just there. That I turned away, pretending to focus on something else that I didn't know when the line appeared. I only know that one day, I realized I'd been standing near it for a long time, convincing myself it wasn't real. Convincing myself I was still on the right side of everything that mattered, that I went to bed that night with my partner's arm around me, staring into the dark, thinking about a conversation I hadn't had yet and a feeling I didn't have a name for, that I told myself it was nothing, that I didn't know then that nothing was how everything always starts. I started noticing the distance before I admitted it existed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fights, no slammed doors, no raised voices. It was quieter than that. A pause before answering. A delay in reaching for my partner's hand. A habit of checking my phone when the room went silent, that he became my first thought instead of my last, that it felt harmless at first. I told myself I was just staying connected, just holding on to something familiar. But familiarity began to feel like a refuge instead of a memory. When my partner talked about their day, I listened, nodded, smiled at the right moments, and all the while I wondered how he would react to the same story. Would he laugh harder? Would he understand it better? Would he hear the part one hadn't said out loud? That question stayed with me longer than it should have. That I started choosing my words more carefully around my partner, smoothing out the rough edges of my thoughts, keeping the complicated parts to myself. With him, I didn't bother. I let the doubts spill. The frustrations. The little disappointments I pretended didn't matter. He never judged them. He just took them in, like they belonged to him. In a way, they started to. The messages grew longer. The calls stretched later into the night. I found myself stepping into empty rooms just to hear his voice without anyone else around. I told myself it was about privacy, not secrecy. That there was a difference, but my partner noticed. They always did. "Who are you talking to?" they asked one evening, not accusing, just curious. That I answered too quickly. "No one important." The words landed between us, heavy and wrong. I saw it in their face, the brief flicker of something like hurt before they smoothed it away. I hated myself for that moment. Hated that I'd created it. Hated that I didn't immediately fix it. Instead, I went back to my phone later and told him about it. We laughed about how awkward it had been. How people always read too much into things. He told me I was overthinking, that I wanted to believe him. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying my day like a film I couldn't pause. I'd count the moments I'd chosen him over my partner. Not in big ways. In small ones. A message answered faster. A thought shared with him first. A joke saved for later. That I told myself these were just habits. Habits could be changed, but I didn't change them. My partner started asking if everything was okay. I said yes. I said it so often it became automatic, like a reflex. Yes, I'm fine. Yes, I'm just tired. Yes, work's been a lot. I used the world as an excuse for the quiet I was creating between us. With him, I didn't have to explain anything. I could just say, "It feels strange lately," and he would understand exactly what I meant, even when I didn't. That understanding felt dangerous. One afternoon, we sat in the car, parked outside a place neither of us really wanted to go into. The engine was off, the air thick with the heat of the day. We talked about nothing for a while, just filling the space with words so we didn't have to acknowledge the silence. At some point, he looked at me and said, "You don't seem happy." I laughed it off. Of course I am. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made me wonder if he saw something I was trying not to. When I got home, my partner was in the kitchen, humming softly, moving around in that familiar way that used to make me feel grounded. They smiled when they saw me. I smiled back. We stood there, facing each other, both pretending everything was exactly as it always had been. Later that night, my phone buzzed under the covers. A simple message. "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time. That I thought about my partner, asleep inches away from me. About the life we were building, the plans we talked about like they were already written in stone. I thought about how easy it would be to roll over and wake them up, to tell them everything I was feeling instead of sending it somewhere else. That I didn't. That I typed back. "Yeah. Just thinking." "You?" The reply came almost instantly. "Always thinking about you." That I closed my eyes after reading it, my chest tight with something that felt too big to be called comfort and too quiet to be called fear. I knew, in that moment, that I was standing in the middle of something I didn't know how to walk away from. That I hadn't crossed a line, but I wasn't standing where I used to anymore. The air felt heavier the day everything shifted. Not in a way you could point to or explain, just a pressure that settled in my chest and refused to move. I noticed it as soon as I saw him standing there, waiting, hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. We didn't talk right away. We rarely did when something mattered too much. Silence had become our language, filled with things neither of us wanted to say out loud. I stood a few steps away, close enough to feel his presence without touching him, far enough to pretend there was still space between us. That he asked how I was. I gave the same answer I always did. Fine. The word felt thin, like it could tear if either of us pulled on it too hard. That he looked at me for a long moment, longer than was comfortable. I felt exposed, like he was reading thoughts I hadn't admitted to myself yet. I crossed my arms, a small, useless shield. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. That was the problem. With him, I never did. That I told him about the tension at home. About the way my partner had started watching me, not suspicious, just uncertain. About how every question felt like an accusation even when it wasn't meant to be. I told him how tired I was of explaining myself, of smoothing things over, of acting like everything was still easy. That he listened, the way he always did, without interrupting, without offering solutions. Just listening. That at some point, he stepped closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. It made my breath catch, and I hated myself for noticing. "That's because you don't feel understood anymore," he said. That I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend my partner, to remind myself of everything we had, everything we were. But the words stuck in my throat. That he tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You feel different when you're with me." I laughed, too quickly, too loudly. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" he asked. The question hung between us, unanswered. That I thought about all the late nights, all the messages, all the moments I'd chosen him without calling it a choice. I thought about how my partner's voice had started to fade into the background while his had become something I searched for in every quiet moment. That I didn't say any of that. That he took another step, and this time there was no space left to pretend with. I could see the details of his face, the crease between his brows, the way his jaw tightened like he was holding something back. "This has been building for a long time," he said. "You know that, right?" My heart started racing. I opened my mouth to deny it, to shut this down before it went any further, but he spoke again before I could. "Let's give it a try, shall we?" The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they were calm. Certain. Like he had already decided this was where we were headed. That my first thought was my partner. The way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The plans we'd made, the promises we'd talked about like they were unbreakable. The life that felt suddenly fragile in my hands. That my second thought was how easy it would be to say yes. That I felt torn in half by those two truths. That I took a step back, my heels brushing against something behind me. A wall, a counter, I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't move any further. He didn't follow. He stayed where he was, watching me, waiting. I can't, I said. The words came out softer than I meant them to. They didn't sound like a boundary. They sounded like a plea. That he nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer. Like it didn't change anything. You already have, he said. That I frowned. What does that mean? It means you've been here with me for a while now, he replied. Even when you're somewhere else. That hurt more than the question had. That I wanted to argue, to prove him wrong, to list all the ways I was still loyal, still committed, still trying. But I couldn't ignore the truth in what he said. I had been giving him pieces of myself that used to belong somewhere else. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, like it was trying to make the decision for me. I don't want to be the reason you lose something real, he said quietly. The irony of it almost made me laugh. That I looked away, focusing on a spot on the floor, anywhere but at him. I felt exposed, like every thought I'd tried to hide was suddenly visible. I thought about how I would explain this moment to my partner, if I ever did. How I would justify standing here, having this conversation, feeling this way. That I didn't know what to say. I didn't come here for this, I finally managed. Neither did I, he replied. But here we are. I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to steady myself. When I opened them, he was still there, still waiting, still offering something I wasn't sure I wanted but didn't know how to refuse. That I didn't answer him. That I didn't walk away either. That I stood there, caught between the life I had and the one he was asking me to imagine, realizing that no matter what I did next, something had already been broken. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt crowded, filled with everything we hadn't said and everything we couldn't take back. I went home carrying it like a weight in my chest, heavy enough to change the way I walked, the way I breathed, the way I looked at the person waiting for me on the other side of the door. That my partner greeted me the same way they always did. A small smile. A familiar question about my day. Their voice was warm, easy, unguarded. It should have made me feel safe. Instead, it made me feel like a stranger standing in the wrong life. That I answered in half-truths. Work was fine. Traffic was bad. I was tired. The words came out smooth, practiced, like I'd been rehearsing them on the way home. They nodded, accepting them without suspicion, and that trust hurt more than if they had doubted me. That we sat together that night, close but not touching. The space between us felt louder than any argument. I kept thinking about how easily I used to lean into them without thinking, how natural it felt to belong there. Now, every movement felt deliberate, like I was afraid of revealing something just by being too close. My phone buzzed in my pocket. That I didn't check it. That was new. That I went to bed with my partner's back turned toward me, their breathing slow and steady. I stared into the dark, replaying his words over and over, hearing them in my own head instead of his voice. You've already been here with me. The more I thought about it, the more I hated how true it felt. The next day, everything felt slightly off, like the world had shifted an inch to the left and I was the only one who noticed. My partner laughed at something I said, and I flinched at how normal it sounded. He passed me in the hallway later, our shoulders almost brushing, and I felt a jolt of awareness I didn't want. That we didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. It lived in the way he avoided my eyes, in the way he paused before speaking, in the way the air between us felt charged instead of comfortable. Whatever he had offered, whatever I hadn't refused clearly enough, it lingered. That my partner started asking more questions. Not directly. Not accusing. Just small things. If I was okay. If I wanted to talk. If something was bothering me. Each question felt like a door opening that I wasn't ready to walk through, that I kept saying no. But at night, when the house was quiet, I'd lie awake and imagine what would happen if I said yes instead. Yes, something is wrong. Yes, I've been leaning on someone else. Yes, I don't know where my loyalty has gone. The conversations played out in my head, ending in tears, in anger, in words I couldn't take back. So I stayed silent. That he pulled back, too. The messages slowed. The calls stopped. When we were in the same room, we kept our distance like there was an invisible line we both agreed not to cross. It should have been a relief. It should have made things easier. That it didn't. The absence felt louder than the presence ever had. I missed the way he used to look at me, like he knew me completely. I missed the comfort of being understood without explaining myself. And I hated myself for missing it. Did my partner notice that, too? The way I'd stare at my phone even when it didn't light up. The way my thoughts seemed somewhere else. One evening, they reached for my hand and held it longer than usual, like they were trying to anchor me in place. "Are you still here?" they asked quietly. The question landed harder than any accusation could have. That I wanted to say yes. I wanted to mean it. That I squeezed their hand, hoping the gesture could say what my words couldn't. They smiled, but it didn't quite reach their eyes. Days turned into weeks. The tension never exploded. It just settled in, a constant hum beneath everything we did. Meals tasted the same, but felt different. Conversations sounded the same, but carried less weight. Even laughter felt careful, like we were both afraid of cracking something fragile. One night, I found myself standing alone in the kitchen, the house dark around me, the only light coming from the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass and barely recognized the person staring back. I saw someone who had tried to hold on to two worlds at once and ended up not fully belonging to either. My phone buzzed. A message from him. That I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pull and the familiar guilt rise up together, tangled and inseparable. I thought about my partner, asleep down the hall, trusting me in a way I wasn't sure I deserved anymore. That I thought about the moment everything had changed without anything actually happening. That I let the phone go dark in my hand. That I still don't know if that was the right choice or just another way of delaying one I'll eventually have to make. All I know is that some lines don't need to be crossed to change everything. Sometimes, just standing close enough to see them clearly is enough to make you realize you can never go back to where you were before.